Here, the question of when you can shoot first really touches primarily on the element of imminence. So for purposes of our discussion, we'll be presuming that the other required elements of self-defense have been satisfied, that you're not the unlawful aggressor. So you have the element of innocence, that your use of force is proportional to the threat, that you're not violating some otherwise existing legal duty to retreat, that your perceptions, your decisions, your actions are those of a reasonable and prudent person. The open question here is really on that element of imminence. Are you required to wait until the other person shoots first, until you've been shot, until force has been used upon you? And the answer is no. The element of imminence holds that you are allowed to defend yourself against the imminent threat, meaning, of course, that would include a threat actually in progress. You're being shot at. But more importantly, more relevant for the purposes of this show, it includes force that's immediately about to happen. So it's not some past threat or some past use of force. We'll see an example of that in the fourth video we'll look at today. And it can't be some speculative future threat that may never happen. So in the context of a past threat, someone's used force upon you, and then that fight effectively ends. And you decide you're going to go find that person and use force upon them. That's not self-defense anymore. That's retribution, or it's vengeance. And you may wish you lived in a world in which those things were permissible. The use of force in retribution or vengeance was permissible, but we don't live in that world. Your use of force is permissible to stop a threat that's occurring or immediately about to occur, not some past threat. Now, having said that, a pretty good reason to believe that someone's about to continue to use force against you is that they just used force, right? So if someone just threatened or struck you with force and they're still present and they still have the ability, the opportunity, jeopardy to inflict force upon you again, the fact that they just did that is a basis for a reasonable inference that they intend to do it again. But if that initial use of force is over, there's been a separation in time or space, for you to go find that person to use force against them in retribution or vengeance would not be the use of force against an imminent threat. You'd, in effect, be starting a second fight. Also, of course, if someone threatens you with some future harm, some future use of force, I'm going to go home and get a gun and come back here and shoot you. Well, when they come back with the gun, they may well be an imminent deadly force threat. But at the moment they're making that threat about some future harm, they're not in that moment yet an imminent threat. And how do we evaluate imminence? I've already mentioned the AOJ triad: ability, opportunity, jeopardy. This is unfortunately often taught as if it were the entirety of self-defense law, as if it was all of this. It's not. AOJ is a wonderful framework for evaluating the imminence of a threat. Does that person who's scaring you, do they have the ability to cause you harm? Do they have the opportunity to bring that ability to bear? And jeopardy, are they conducting themselves in such a way that a reasonable person would believe they intend to bring that ability, opportunity to bear against you? When you have all three, AOJ, ability, opportunity, jeopardy, you have an imminent threat of force. And that element of imminence is satisfied. And if the other elements of self-defense are also satisfied, you'd be legally justified in using defensive force. The important point here for today's show is that you don't have to wait until you are struck, or until you were shot, or until you were stabbed. You're allowed to defend yourself against the imminent threat that is about to happen. So the first video we have here is appears to be kind of a road rage event. We'll see a man, this man here in the white hat to the left of this green vehicle is angry with the people inside the rear vehicle. He's going to pull out a gun and approach the driver's side door of the vehicle, and then he's going to have a very, very bad day. So let's go ahead and play this little video clip. So there he is. He's coming around. There's his gun. He cycles the slide, comes up to the window. He's waving the gun around. Pop, 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 pop. The driver presumably fires a bunch of rounds through his own window into this guy, who runs away, gets dizzy, falls over, and presumably he's done. Very common, of course. The cardiovascular system gets severely compromised, but there's enough blood pressure for the person to continue functioning for a short distance, and then blood pressure drops, and that's it. It's all over for them. They're actually dead the instant they're shot. They just don't know it yet. And then they fall over. This happens a lot, by the way, with knife injuries. People are stabbed. Often they don't know they're stabbed. It feels just like a punch to them. And they run away and they make it a block or so, and the blood pressure drops. And that's when we know they've been mortally wounded. So, who fires first here? Well, it's not the guy in the hat. He doesn't fire first, right? He's not the first guy to shoot. But what is he doing? Is he presenting himself such that the driver inside the vehicle reasonably perceives him as an unlawful, imminent, deadly force threat? That's the legal question. Is he presenting ability? Well, yeah, ability to cause harm. He's got a gun. Opportunity. Well, he's right there outside the door. Jeopardy. Is he conducting himself in such a way that he's suggesting he's prepared to bring that ability and opportunity to bear? He was doing all three of those things. So we have ability, opportunity, jeopardy. He's presenting as an imminent threat. We're presuming the other elements are also present, that it was not the person inside the car, for example, that was the initial unlawful aggressor in this confrontation. He's presenting as an imminent unlawful threat, and that meets the conditions for the person inside the vehicle to do this. Pop, pop, pop. See the holes in the window there? I'll make it a little bigger so it's easier to see. And this dude is DRT, dead right there. He's just not aware of it yet. Lawful shooting in self-defense? It certainly appears that way. Now, could different facts, new facts, small changes in facts result in big changes of legal outcomes? But the right legal question is, was the man who was shot here presenting himself as an imminent threat to the persons within the vehicle, particularly an imminent deadly force threat in this context, waving a gun around? The answer is yes. And if the answer is yes, and the other elements of self-defense are also satisfied, then this is a lawful shooting in self-defense, even though the driver shot first. Shooting first, perfectly legit here. Here's another interesting shooting. This is in a convenience store. It's a little hard to tell exactly what's going on here. I do have a zoomed in version of this as well. We have two young, it looks like they're two young black males here. The person higher in the image, who's currently kind of bent over, apparently both these gentlemen have pistols tucked into their armpits, under their left armpits. I don't know why anyone would do that. It would never occur to me to do that. But apparently they both have guns under their left armpits. And the person who's kind of bent over now is going to try to strip from the lower person his gun from under his armpit, and a gunfight ensues. So I'll play the whole clip here for you, and then we'll take a look at the zoomed in version to try to get a little more clarity about what may be going on here. Whoops. Here we go. So this is a gunfight, kind of extended gunfight in this convenience store. Goes for the gun. Other guy, now they each have a gun out, pop, 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 shooting at each other. Look at this. Woo! Like from a movie. First guy with the bright sneakers is down, crawling away. Extended magazines. They don't pay attention to magazine capacity limits, I guess. And he runs off. That's the entire clip that I have. Let's take a look at this zoomed in version, and I'll make this one a little bit larger here. So we have these two gentlemen. We have the gun grab here. You see he's reaching around either side of that gentleman's arm, trying to get his gun from him, goes for the grab. Now, if someone grabs your gun, is that an imminent deadly force threat? I would suggest it is. I think it's no different than if they lunged for a gun on a table. In fact, it's actually worse because they're simultaneously arming themselves and disarming you at the same time. Now, I think we need to presume here that there's no legal justification for this gun grab. Certainly the person whose gun is being grabbed does not appear that they're eminently threatening the person doing the grabbing. He goes for the gun grab here, doesn't get the gun. The lower person will present his pistol, and this dude here suddenly presents a gun. It looks like he's reaching across his body and he's getting his own gun from under his armpit. Kind of hard to tell, but he's got a gun out now too. So what's happening here? Could they both be legally justified? Well, in theory, they both could be legally justified, except that this gentleman certainly appears to have been the initial unlawful aggressor. If he is, he's lost the element of innocence, and therefore he's lost the privilege of self-defense. So him, even though he's arguably about to be shot by the person whose gun he tried to grab, that doesn't entitle you to legally defend yourself. You may defend yourself with your own gun, but if you're the bad actor, that's an unlawful use of defensive force, not a lawful use of defensive force. So, of course, we can't really tell who shot first here, but let's presume you can get a good shot. Well, you can't really see it there. You can really see the extended magazine sticking out the bottom of the gun. So thank goodness, Colorado limits me to 15-round magazines. Thank you, Colorado. I'm sure the bad guys are similarly limiting themselves to 15-round magazines. Let's presume that it's the person here whose gun was being grabbed that shot first. Is he allowed to shoot first? He's allowed to shoot as long as he's defending himself against an imminent threat, which certainly appears to be the case, and of course, as long as the other elements of self-defense are also satisfied. He's not required to wait until he's shot himself. Here we have another video. This one appears to be, I'm told, that it's a California Highway Patrol, CHIP, CHP, struggling with a suspect on a roadway, and it turns to gunfire. So I'll play the clip straight through, and then we can look at it in more detail. It starts with the struggle, and the cop will get to his feet, and then he'll discharge his gun into the suspect. Pop, 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 pop. Number of rounds fired. So One concept of imminence is that imminence can be thought of as a window that opens and closes, right? When initially there's no imminent threat, then the threat becomes imminent, but there can come a time when the threat is no longer imminent, when the threat's been neutralized by one means or another. Either the threatener has given up, or they're no longer, they've been made incapable of continuing to threaten imminent force. And this looks like a shooting where that might have occurred, where the officer continues using deadly force when there was no longer an imminent threat, based on what we can see in the video. So here, the officer's struggling with the suspect. Let's presume this is a lawful arrest being made. So the officers are allowed to use force to compel compliance with a lawful arrest. Maybe the suspect is about to access the officer's weapon. There we see the weapon's on the right hip. Maybe there's a reach there for the gun. If the suspect's reaching for the officer's gun, it's no different than the last video we just saw, right? Someone reaching for your gun is simultaneously arming themselves and disarming you. Certainly the officer would be privileged to shoot that person off his gun if necessary to retain control of his gun. So if there's an ongoing struggle for the gun, the officer is allowed to use deadly force to prevent the loss of control of his weapon. Here, in this close proximity, we see the gun come there. The officer's getting his gun. He's got it out, brings it down, and we have, looks like a first shot there. Kind of hits the sidewalk, maybe. It's hard to tell. Here, they're still both hands on, right? And there's a risk of control of the gun being lost. So I can envision a circumstance in which this would be lawful for the officer to fire a shot here. Where it gets more problematic is where this distance is created. Maybe not quite there, but certainly when the officer takes that step back. Is this suspect still an imminent threat of seizing control of that handgun? Maybe, but it certainly looks less so than a moment before, and the officer is still shooting here. Is this suspect still an imminent threat of seizing control of that handgun? I would suggest no. And if he's not any longer an imminent threat, this continued use of deadly force by the officer can't be legally justified. Now, are there circumstances in which this bad guy could still be an imminent deadly force threat? Sure. If we imagine the bad guy has his own gun, he's reaching for an apparent gun in his waistband, even from the ground, then of course he would still be an imminent deadly force threat to the officer at this distance. We just can't see that in the video. So there's another shot. So there, let's see, right there. I mean, the officer's a step and a half away now from the suspect. So unless the officer can articulate some manner in which this suspect was still presenting, was still reasonably perceived as AOJ, ability to cause deadly force harm, opportunity to bring that deadly force harm to bear, and conducting himself in such a way that he could be reasonably perceived as intending to do that in the moment, there is no longer an imminent deadly force threat here. So would the officer here be justified in firing first? Yes, here. But continuing to fire here, much more difficult to justify. Now, I don't understand. I don't know what the outcome here was. Doesn't look good for the suspect. I expect it's not particularly good for the officer either. Finally, we have this video here. This is actually a news report, and there's some audio here. So let's go ahead and listen to the entire news report. This involves apparently a female rapper who gets into a physical confrontation with two men, one of whom is her manager. I don't know what they're doing here. I don't know if they're just beating her or they're attempting to rob her, but it certainly appears that there's some kind of 2-on-1 disparity of numbers, men against a woman defender here, which would give rise to perhaps a reasonable perception that this woman would be privileged in this moment, facing this attack, into using deadly force to defend herself. The question, of course, is she facing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury? Disparity of numbers, larger, stronger aggressors against a smaller, weaker defender would all give rise to reasonable grounds to perceive a deadly force threat. If not one likely to kill, then one likely to cause serious bodily injury. And of course, this attack appears to be in progress in the moment. So obviously then it would be imminent. But remember earlier I talked about how imminence is a window that opens and closes. So it can be, a threat can become imminent, the window opens, and then it can stop being imminent. The window closes. And after the threat's no longer imminent, you're no longer privileged to use force in self-defense. And that appears to be what happens here. So let's go ahead and play this video straight through, and then we'll come back to it.
Only on 6, video exclusively obtained by NBC6 shows the moment rapper Kavani Camilla Hicks fatally shoots her manager in Wynwood. The shooting happened back in October. The video shows the rapper and another man arguing next to a white car. Suddenly gets physical. 2 men seen on top of Hicks pinning her down. At one point, she gets up. Police ended up charging the rapper with murder in the 2nd degree. She appeared in court this morning and will soon be released and placed on house arrest with a $50,000 bond. Hicks claims it was all in self-defense.
House arrest for a murder caught on video. That's remarkably lenient, I have to say. Especially in Florida. Not uncommon in Florida for bail to be denied under these kinds of circumstances. But so here we have this initial fight. Do we have here an imminent deadly force threat against the female rapper who's, I presume, is the one on the sidewalk? Perhaps so. It looks that way. Could be. There she is getting up off the ground. While she's apparently getting beaten or getting robbed here, would she be privileged in this moment from pulling a handgun and using that handgun to defend herself? I think she'd have a viable self-defense justification for that. Unfortunately, that's not when she uses the gun. She uses the gun here when apparently she's no longer under attack. So here she is. She's coming into the frame. She's got her gun up and she's shooting. Where are the men? The men are not there. They're not attacking her any longer. In fact, when we see them, the one of them, he's running away from the gunfire. Now, again, just like with the cop video, if we imagine that this dude has his own gun, maybe he's still presenting as a imminent deadly force threat, but I don't see a gun here. She just is pursuing him, follows him around the car, shoots him again, and of course, as we know, ultimately kills him. I don't know where this car comes from. Maybe it's the other dude who was in the fight. By the way, would he be privileged? Could this be a justified use of force against this rapper? Presuming this is intentional and not some weird kind of accident. Maybe even if he were beating her up earlier, if he was one of the 2 men beating this female rapper on the sidewalk earlier, that would be unlawful. He's still on the hook for that. But if the beating had stopped and the female rapper had gone and gotten a gun and was starting to shoot them, she's not privileged to shoot them after she's no longer facing an imminent threat of harm. She actually becomes an initial aggressor in a second fight, a deadly force fight of her own making with the gun. And yes, that driver, if he reasonably perceives she's about to unlawfully shoot him, would be privileged in using deadly defensive force himself to prevent from being unlawfully shot. Obviously, striking someone with a car, and she looks like she actually gets run over, would be deadly force, but could be justified on these facts. That would not remove the driver's liability from being an actor, an unlawful actor in the first beating. He's still on the hook for that, but that does not justify her escalating to deadly defensive force after she was no longer facing an imminent threat of harm. All right, folks, let me take a look now at the Law of Self-Defense member chat to see if there are questions or comments I need to address. Let's see. Let's see. Jeffrey says, Branca, gun law, not self-defense, but Ohio is on the move again. Just moved Second Amendment Preservation Act out of committee. HB 233. I don't know what HB 233 is. What's Second Amendment preservation mean? Is it self-defense immunity? Oh, there's Josh Williams. Right. Okay, so this... Right. I had covered this. Josh, Representative Williams was on my show as a guest. it was not quite a self-defense immunity statute, as I recall. But if it actually gets signed into law, I'll cover it again. You know what? I will link to the interview with Josh. I'll put that link in the description of today's show for folks who are interested in following up on that. Very, very nice guy, Mr. Williams. Very smart dude, doing God's work for his Ohio residents. Let's see. Jeffrey says shoulder holsters. That must be the convenience store robbery with the two men. It didn't look like they were wearing shoulder holsters, but let's see. What is the object or two objects that appear to fly off to the right of the guy on the ground? Is that with respect to the Chips video? Let me take a look. Yeah, I don't know what that is. Could that be a gun? But even then, the guns, even if we imagine it was a gun that like kinds of it's falling away from the suspect, how is this shot justified? Now, of course, there is a reaction time gap. And Jeffrey asks this. First shot by CHP was at 4-second mark. Last was at 6 seconds. Doesn't that small time window make a big difference? Maybe. But, 2 seconds is quite a bit of time. I mean, it's small enough that it could be relevant in decision-making, but we all, you drive a car, you're making fraction of a second judgment calls all the time, driving a car, right? Can you imagine driving a car and you could only make a decision every 2 seconds? I mean, you'd be in crashes all the time. And especially when you have this kind of, sorry, folks. Here, I forgot to put the video up. So these are the two objects being referenced coming off to the right side there. 2 seconds can be a long period of time. Long enough to know that circumstances have changed. Now, if the changes are minute, maybe you wouldn't be able to tell in 2 seconds. But if the changes are gross, the changes in circumstances, and this looks like a pretty gross change in circumstances to me. I mean, this cop knows how far he is from that suspect, right? We're not talking about whether the suspect might have been reaching for a weapon in his waistband or something, and it was actually a cell phone, but it could have been a gun. That's much more subtle. Or there's an object in the suspect's hands. I mean, that can be much harder to determine in a small time frame. This, I would think, would not be that hard. But of course, it would be a finding of fact to be argued to a jury. Oh, Jeffrey says HB 233 is different. It's to make Ohio a Second Amendment sanctuary state. Again, I don't do gun law, folks, but I don't know that the sanctuary state means anything. The federal law is supreme. So whether we like it or not. All right. Well, that looks like all of that, folks. So a bit of a concise show today. I'd like to keep the shows closer to 30 minutes so I could then I'd actually be able to do more shows focused on particular content. So with that done, let me go ahead and begin to wrap things up. Anything else we should talk about? I don't think so. Oh, tomorrow I'm going to be doing a show on a video clip, very unfortunate video clip, another shooting, of course, in which a robbery suspect is completely compliant with the robbers and they nevertheless shoot him dead. And the reason we're exploring this is not so much for the legal principles involved. The legal principles it's just an unlawful killing, but for documentary purposes. So one of the things we want to do here at Law Self-Defense is not just teach you the legal principles, but also provide you with real world examples from which you can develop your own specialized knowledge that guides your own decisions in self-defense. That provide a foundation for you to be able to get that specialized knowledge through our content in front of a jury if you are ever to find yourself in similar circumstances, having had used force in self-defense, and now you're being tasked by the criminal justice system with explaining to a jury why your conduct in self-defense was reasonable. Reasonableness, of course, being one of the elements of self-defense. So tomorrow's show will be a kind of documentary content, providing specialized knowledge on the issue of even 100% compliance with an armed robber can still end up with you dead, and therefore might motivate you to not simply comply, but to resist the threat of deadly force against you for reasonable grounds, because you've seen this kind of event go this way through our content. So I look forward to live streaming all that to all of you tomorrow. We'll do it again at noon Eastern time as usual. You'll all get the email notification if you're part of our email list. Thanks to, by the way, to all our new YouTube subscribers. We're well over 52,000 subscribers now. If you're watching this on YouTube and you don't yet subscribe, I would encourage you to do that. It helps us get our content and message out to more people, of course, and the subscribe is free. So if you could hit that subscribe button, that would be much appreciated. With that said, remember, folks, if you carry a gun, so you're hard to kill. If you carry a knife, so you're hard to kill. If you carry pepper spray, so you're hard to kill. If you study jujitsu, so you're hard to kill. That's why I do all those things. So, in fact, right after this, I'm heading to jujitsu. That's why I do all those things. So I'm hard to kill. So my family is hard to kill. Then you also owe it to yourself and your family to make sure you also know the law, so you're hard to convict as well. Until tomorrow, I remain attorney Andrew Branca for Law Self-Defense. Stay safe.